The descent into the trap. I stood in the cavernous, imported marble lobby of the Sterling Tower, my bruised, cheap rolling suitcase heavy against my leg, watching my husband smile at the building manager, as if he hadn't just single-handedly dismantled my dignity. 10 minutes earlier, I had watched his 22-year-old daughter, Chloe, parade a gaggle of loud, unkempt, champagne-drunk friends past the concierge desk and straight into the private executive elevator. That elevator led to the penthouse. My company penthouse. That opulent suite was the only physical, tangible proof of my promotion to regional director, a title I had bled for over 35 years. But to my husband, Richard, and his entitled offspring, it was just a free luxury playground. A VIP lounge funded by my blood, sweat, and corporate loyalty. When the building manager had politely inquired about the noise complaints from the night before, I expected my husband to apologize. I expected him to act like the senior corporate accountant he was, to show some semblance of respect for the rules. Instead, he adjusted his designer tie, a tie I had bought him for his birthday, looked the manager in the eye, and chuckled, brushing it off as kids blowing off steam. He threw my professional reputation right to the wolves, all to buy another ounce of affection from a daughter who viewed him as an ATM. If you're watching this video, darling, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you right now. I still remember the specific shade of sickly yellow the streetlights cast that Tuesday evening. It wasn't just dark, it was the kind of oppressive, suffocating urban gloom that promises absolute misery and delivers it in spades. The wind was whipping through the concrete canyons of the financial district in aggressive, relentless gusts, turning the polished glass of the corporate skyscrapers into black mirrors that reflected my own profound exhaustion back at me. I sat on the edge of a mattress in a miserable $60 a night motel 3 blocks from the office, watching the neon vacancy sign flicker through the thin, stained curtains. My stomach churned with a vicious, acidic anxiety. $60. It made my chest tight. That was a week of groceries. That was a fraction of the electric bill I was still paying for our suburban house, while Richard lived it up. I gripped the thin, scratchy bedspread until my arthritic fingers ached, doing the mental math I had been doing every single night for the past month. If I skipped lunch, if I walked the 20 blocks to the client meetings instead of taking a cab, I could justify this pathetic expense. I am 62 years old, I told myself, my voice echoing hollowly in the dingy room. I have a 6-figure salary, a corner office, and I am sleeping on a mattress that smells of stale smoke and despair because I was terrified of being perceived as a difficult wife. The next morning, I stepped out into the biting city chill. The damp air soaked right through my wool coat immediately. I shivered, hunching my shoulders, clutching my leather briefcase against my chest like a shield. I walked the 3 blocks to the Sterling Tower, my joints protesting every step. And then I saw it. My stomach didn't just drop, it evaporated. Pulling out of the underground VIP parking garage, splashing through the dirty city slush, was the sleek, black company Lincoln Navigator. My assigned company navigator. The one that was supposed to be the chariot of my twilight career triumph. But I wasn't sitting in the back reading quarterly reports. I froze, the cold wind biting the end of my nose, paralyzed by a toxic cocktail of confusion and dread. The tinted window rolled down halfway, and a cloud of expensive, cloying vape smoke billowed out, followed by a head of perfectly highlighted, salon fresh hair. Chloe, my stepdaughter. I watched, unable to move, as she laughed at something the driver, one of her scruffy, unemployed boyfriends, said. She was wearing a cashmere wrap that I knew cost more than my first automobile. She tossed a coffee cup out the window into a trash can, missed, and the SUV sped off into the morning traffic. She was keeping the car. She wasn't just using it to move her things, she was taking the vehicle for the day. Again. I felt a surge of heat that had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing temperature. It was shame. Pure, unadulterated shame mixed with a panic, so sharp it tasted like copper on my tongue. I was standing there, freezing to the bone, having paid $60 to sleep in a hovel, while my unemployed stepdaughter was chauffeured around, in my corporate benefits package to do God knows what. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into the street, block the car, and demand she hand over the keys. But I couldn't. I was frozen by the irrational, ingrained fear that making a scene would be worse than the theft itself. Helen. The voice came from behind me, cutting through the sound of the morning traffic like a freshly sharpened knife. I jumped, spinning around so fast my heel caught on the pavement, and I almost slipped. Mr. Sterling was standing there. My boss, the CEO of the entire Eastern Division. He was standing near the entrance of his own private town car, holding a leather portfolio, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity, confusion, annoyance? He looked from me, shivering, exhausted, wheeling a battered overnight bag to the direction the black Lincoln had just vanished. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I squeaked. I cleared my throat, trying desperately to sound like a competent, seasoned regional director and not a displaced vagrant. "Good morning, sir. Why did I just see you walking out of the Starlight Motel, down the street?" he asked. His voice was low, carrying easily over the roar of the city. He pointed a gloved hand toward the parking garage. "And why are you dragging luggage? Is there something wrong with the penthouse suite we assigned to you? Plumbing issues, security?" My mind raced. I felt like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. If the deer was also hyperventilating and facing a massive tax penalty, what could I say? If I said yes, he would have maintenance tear the place apart. If I said no, I had to explain why a 22-year-old college dropout was currently treating a $15,000 a month corporate asset like a frat house. The executive handbook flashed through my mind. Specifically, page 12, section A, corporate housing is for the sole, exclusive use of the assigned executive to facilitate business operations. Unauthorized long-term occupants are strictly prohibited. Well, you see, I stammered. It's a temporary logistical situation. I sounded like an absolute idiot. I sounded guilty. I sounded exactly like someone who was misappropriating corporate assets, which, technically by proxy, I was. "Morning, Mr. Sterling." "Morning, darling." We both turned. Richard was walking toward us, holding 2 artisanal lattes, flashing that easy, charming, infuriating smile that usually got him out of everything. He didn't look worried. He didn't look like a man whose wife was currently undergoing a silent, massive coronary event. He looked like he was greeting a golf buddy at the country club. "Morning, sir," Richard said, stopping beside me. He didn't hand me a coffee. He just nodded at the CEO. "Brisk weather we're having, right?" Mr. Sterling didn't smile back. He looked at Richard, then at the bruised luggage in my hand, then back at me. "Richard," Mr. Sterling said, his tone cooling by several degrees, matching the frost in the air. "I was just asking your wife why she is commuting from a budget motel with a suitcase, while her assigned corporate penthouse is apparently being occupied by someone who just drove off in her assigned vehicle." I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment Richard would realize the sheer, catastrophic gravity of the situation. He worked in the accounting department of this very firm, for crying out loud. He knew the compliance rules, the tax implications of fringe benefits better than anyone. Surely he would come up with a brilliant, ironclad emergency excuse. A pipe burst and we had a temporary relocation. A family medical emergency. Richard chuckled. He actually genuinely chuckled. "Oh, that," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively, nearly spilling his foam. "That's just my daughter, Chloe. She's taking a gap year, applying to grad schools. And she just needed a quiet place to study and decompress for a bit. And since Helen is always at the office working so hard, we figured it was silly for that massive apartment to just sit there empty most of the day. Efficiency of resources, right? Family first. I felt all the blood rapidly drain from my face, rushing to my feet. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, catching the cold air. He hadn't just admitted it. He had framed it as if he were doing the corporation a favor. He had framed it as a logical, rational, heartwarming decision that any sane, family-oriented executive would make. Mr. Sterling went completely, utterly still. The silence that stretched between the three of us was heavier than the steel beams holding up the skyscraper above us. I watched his jaw tighten, a small, distinct muscle jumping near his ear. Efficiency, Mr. Sterling repeated, the word tasting like bitter ash in the winter air. Exactly, Richard said, completely and utterly oblivious to the executioner's block he had just placed his head upon. We're in a transitional phase right now. And since we both work under the Sterling umbrella, we view the corporate perks as shared family resources. It works out for everyone. It works out for everyone, I screamed internally, my chest tight with a rage so profound it made my vision blur. I just paid $60 to sleep on springs that poked into my ribs. I am 62 years old and my back is screaming. I have a board presentation in 3 hours that I now have to prepare for in a public restroom to do my makeup. How on God's green earth is this working out for me? But I didn't say that. I stood there, shivering, terrified that if I spoke I would either start violently sobbing or physically assaulting him. I see, Mr. Sterling said finally. His eyes were cold, hard, unforgiving flints of gray. Helen. Richard. My office. Both of you. 12 noon. Do not be late. He turned on his heel and walked through the revolving glass doors without waiting for a response. The walk through the lobby felt like a funeral procession. The ambient classical music playing over the speakers sounded like a dirge. I was completely numb to the luxury around me. All I could feel was the sick, sinking, hollow sensation in my gut. The kind you get when you realize you've stepped off a high wire and gravity is just about to politely introduce itself. Richard fell into step beside me, sipping his latte. What's his problem? He muttered, keeping his voice low but not low enough. He looks like he swallowed a bad oyster. I glanced at him, utterly incredulous. Richard, I hissed, my voice a venomous whisper. You just told the chief executive officer that your daughter is living in the executive penthouse. The penthouse that is assigned to me for work. For tax-compliant corporate housing. Richard shrugged, pushing the elevator button with a manicured finger. It's a perk, Helen. Like a company phone or a gym membership. People bring their kids to the corporate gym all the time. He's just being an old-school stiff. It is a $15,000 a month liability, not a treadmill, I whispered furiously, wiping a stray tear of pure frustration from my eye as we entered the hushed, carpeted elevator bank. The other executives waiting for the lift looked away, pretending not to hear the desperate cracking of my voice. Every step toward my office felt like I was wearing lead boots. I thought about the promotion. I had worked at Sterling Enterprises for 35 years. 35 years of missing birthdays. 35 years of fixing the catastrophic mistakes of younger, less competent men who were promoted over me. 35 years of eating sad salads at my desk at 8 p.m. I had clawed my way, bleeding and exhausted, up to regional director. That penthouse wasn't just an apartment. It was the trophy. It was the ultimate validation that I, Helen, was worth something profound to this massive machine. And in the span of 3 agonizing minutes, Richard had turned it into a punchline for a spoiled 22-year-old's gap year. At noon, my stomach a tangled knot of dread, we walked into Mr. Sterling's office. It was a sprawling, glass-walled corner suite that overlooked the city skyline. The same skyline my penthouse was supposed to overlook. He gestured to the two heavy leather chairs opposite his desk. "Sit," he commanded. Not a request. An order. I sat cautiously on the edge of the chair. Richard sat back comfortably, crossing one leg over the other, placing his empty coffee cup on the corner of Mr. Sterling's pristine mahogany desk without asking. Mr. Sterling stared at the cup for a long, agonizing second, his nostrils flaring slightly, before walking around to his high-backed chair. "I want to be unequivocally clear about what I was informed of this morning," Mr. Sterling began, his voice dangerously even and meticulously slow. "Helen, you are the designated resident of Suite 401, correct?" "Yes, sir," I whispered. My hands were trembling violently in my lap. I clenched them together, white-knuckled, to stop the shaking. "And Richard," he turned his gaze to my husband. "You are a senior accountant in our internal audit division, which means you are intimately, legally familiar with our corporate compliance policies regarding taxable fringe benefits. Correct?" "Of course, sir," Richard said smoothly. He used his calm, slightly condescending audit voice, the one designed to de-escalate nervous clients by pretending the IRS wasn't at the door. "I know the ledger back to front." "Then explain to me," Mr. Sterling said, leaning forward, placing his large palms flat on the desk, "why a non-employee dependent is utilizing a highly taxable corporate housing asset as a personal residence, while my regional director is pulling her luggage out of a flea-bag motel down the street." I braced myself. I prayed to whatever gods were listening that Richard would just apologize. Just say he made a momentary lapse in judgment. Say he would have her out by sunset. "Sir, with all due respect, I think we're getting bogged down in corporate semantics," Richard said. I closed my eyes. The darkness behind my eyelids offered no comfort. Semantics. He just told the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm he was arguing semantics. "My daughter, Chloe, has been dealing with severe burnout," Richard continued, his tone taking on a righteous, almost charitable quality that made my skin crawl. "She's a fragile girl. She needs a secure environment. Helen works a grueling schedule here. The penthouse sits empty from dawn to dusk. It seemed incredibly cruel, honestly, to force my daughter to live in some unsafe, cramped college apartment, when we have a sprawling, secure facility available. We view the suite as a family resource. Since Helen and I are married, what's hers is mine. We're a team. We share." I sat there, my mind screaming in a soundproof room. We share. We didn't share. He took. I gave. I paid the mortgage on the house he left behind. I paid the premium health insurance. I paid for his daughter's ridiculous art history credits. Chloe didn't just use the apartment. She commanded it. That wasn't sharing. That was parasitism wrapped in a gold-plated wedding band. But I couldn't say that. Not here. Because if I contradicted my husband in front of the CEO, I would look chaotic, unstable, emotionally volatile. The exact stereotypes men like Mr. Sterling used to deny women like me the C-suite. Mr. Sterling looked at me, his eyes piercing through my carefully constructed facade. "Helen, is this your view as well? That a heavily regulated corporate asset is a family resource?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, the rope fraying rapidly. I looked at Richard. He was watching me, his eyes slightly widened, a silent, heavy warning broadcasting loud and clear. "Don't you dare make me look bad. Don't you dare be difficult." I looked back at Mr. Sterling. He was waiting for the truth. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat, tasting copper again. "I want to support my family, sir." Richard felt that. "Since the suite is so large." I trailed off. I couldn't finish the lie. I physically, biologically couldn't do it. but I also couldn't tell the truth. My husband emotionally blackmails me into letting his spoiled child ruin my sanctuary. And I am too exhausted and beaten down by 30 years of marriage to fight him. It is not about what Richard feels, Mr. Sterling interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. It is about federal tax liability and corporate image. If that girl throws a party and someone falls off the balcony, Helen, the company is liable. This isn't a timeshare. It is a tool. A tool I gave to you to execute a massive regional project. We understand the liability concerns, Richard interjected, completely unbothered, crossing his arms. But Chloe is a responsible young adult. She's just studying. That is entirely irrelevant, Mr. Sterling snapped, finally losing his icy patience. The suite is for work. Period. Helen, I expect that penthouse to be vacated by non-employees by the end of the business day. And if I see unauthorized personnel in the company vehicle again, I will revoke the entire housing package. Is that understood? Yes, sir, I said, my face burning with the heat of 1,000 suns. Absolutely. I will handle it today. Wait, hold on, Richard said, his brow furrowing in genuine irritation. Today? She has a study group coming over tonight. She can't just pack up her life in 6 hours. That's unreasonable. I stared at him. Was he clinically insane? Was he actually arguing with the CEO about his daughter's fake study group? Richard, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a low, guttural register. That made the fine hairs on my arms stand at attention. I do not care about her study group. I care about my asset. Clear it out. You're both dismissed. He turned back to his computer monitors, dismissing us as if we were unruly interns. Richard stood up abruptly, grabbing his empty cup. He looked genuinely furious now. Not at Mr. Sterling, but at the sheer inconvenience of the rules. Unbelievable, he muttered under his breath as we walked out the heavy doors. Richard, I whispered fiercely as soon as the door clicked shut, pulling him into an alcove. How could you argue with him? He could have fired me on the spot. He's being a tyrannical dinosaur, Richard scoffed, checking his expensive watch. He's just flexing his authority because he's bored. Look, I'll text Chloe. She's going to be hyperventilating. She was really looking forward to having her friends over. You really couldn't have just backed me up in there, Helen. I stopped breathing. I stared at his impeccably groomed face. He wasn't worried about my career. He wasn't worried about the audit risk to the firm. He was worried that his adult daughter might be slightly inconvenienced from her free luxury vacation. The realization hit me harder than the biting city wind. I wasn't his partner in life. I was the annoying, necessary obstacle standing between his daughter and her unchecked happiness. I didn't go back to my desk. I couldn't. I felt raw, completely exposed. Like my skin had been peeled back and salt rubbed into the nerves. I ducked into the executive women's restroom, locked myself in the handicap stall, and leaned against the cold marble wall, closing my eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Richard. Chloe is crying hysterically. She says she feels like a squatter. I hope you're happy. We need to talk about your complete lack of empathy tonight. I stared at the screen. The words blurred as a single, hot tear escaped my eye. Lack of empathy. I had spent my entire life being empathetic, bleeding myself dry for this man and his child. And the moment I was pushed to the absolute brink of professional ruin, I was the villain. I wiped the tear away fiercely. The sadness was gone, instantly replaced by a deep, dark, vibrating rage. It was a terrifying, beautiful feeling. It was the feeling of a woman who had finally realized she had absolutely nothing left to lose. The reckoning. The rest of Wednesday was a blur of meaningless spreadsheets and hollow corporate jargon. I operated on autopilot, my mind a million miles away, locked in the penthouse I wasn't allowed to inhabit. At 5 p.m. precisely, I didn't go back to the Starlight Motel. I didn't text Richard. I took the executive elevator, the one my keycard granted me exclusive access to, and rode it all the way up to the 40th floor. The doors slid open with a soft, expensive ping. The hallway was silent, lined with tasteful modern art and thick, sound-absorbing carpets. I walked to Suite 401. My hand hovered over the electronic lock. I pressed my keycard against the reader. It flashed green. The heavy oak door swung open, and the smell hit me before the visual did. It wasn't the smell of a quiet study group. It was the pungent, unmistakable stench of stale beer, imported weed, and cheap, sweet vape juice. I stepped inside, my heart hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. The penthouse was, quite simply, destroyed. The custom white leather sectional sofa I had admired on my very first walkthrough was covered in dark, sticky stains and littered with half-empty solo cups. The antique glass coffee table was smeared with an unidentifiable residue. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the skyline, were smudged with handprints and grease. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling with a terrifying fury. No answer. The apartment was empty, the occupants likely sleeping off their burnout somewhere else. I walked further in, my shoes sticking slightly to the hardwood floor. In the dining area, the company-provided corporate tab had clearly been abused. Stacks of silver room service cloches were piled high on the mahogany table, alongside empty bottles of Cristal, champagne that cost more than my weekly motel bill. But it was what I saw in the center of the room that made the breath completely leave my lungs. On a marble pedestal near the window, there had been a sculpture. A modern, abstract piece of blown glass, commissioned specifically for the Sterling corporate suites. Valued, according to my intake inventory, at $30,000. It was gone. In its place was a pile of shattered, jagged, multicolored glass shards sweeping across the floor. Someone had swept the bulk of the destruction into a haphazard pile, but the pedestal was empty. $30,000. The number flashed in my mind in neon, violent red. The company insurance wouldn't cover gross negligence by an unauthorized occupant. It would come out of my pocket. It would come out of my retirement. I fell to my knees, my expensive skirt soaking up the spilled alcohol on the floor, and I wept. I wept for the money, for my career, for the 35 years of grinding that had led me to a pile of broken glass. But mostly, I wept because I knew, with absolute, sickening certainty, that Richard would tell me to just pay it and keep my mouth shut. As I knelt there, my eyes caught something glowing underneath the ruined leather sofa. I reached under, my fingers brushing against sticky wrappers, and pulled out an iPad. It had a sparkly pink case. Chloe's. It was unlocked. She hadn't even bothered with a passcode. The screen was open to an application I didn't immediately recognize. A sleek, black interface with high-resolution photos. I looked closer. It was an exclusive, high-end peer-to-peer rental app. The kind used for filming locations and underground luxury parties. I tapped the screen. There, listed under a pseudonym, was the Sterling Penthouse. Luxury Skyline Suite, $2,500 per night. Perfect for influencer shoots and exclusive gatherings. Discreet building. My blood ran completely icy cold. I checked the transaction history. 10 bookings in the last month. $25,000. She wasn't studying. She wasn't dealing with burnout. She was running an illegal, unlicensed nightclub out of my corporate housing, using my name as the shield. And the payout. I tapped the banking details linked to the account. The routing number was familiar. Too familiar. It was a joint account. But not mine and Richard's. It was the account Richard shared with Chloe for her college expenses. He knew. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the skull. Richard was an accountant. He monitored every dime that flowed through his world. He knew she was subleasing it. He was probably the one who set up the shell account to avoid the tax flags. He was funneling the money, letting his daughter trash my career, so they could pocket 25 grand a month off the Sterling Company dime. I didn't scream. I didn't cry anymore. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. I emailed the entire transaction history, the banking details, and the messages, straight to my personal, encrypted email address. Then I took photos. Wide shots of the damage, close-ups of the shattered $30,000 sculpture, the room service receipts. I left the iPad exactly where I found it. I walked out, the lock clicking solidly behind me. I didn't go to the motel. I took a cab straight to the suburban house I paid the mortgage on. I walked in at 8 p.m. Richard was sitting in his leather recliner, swirling a glass of scotch, watching a golf tournament. He didn't look up when I entered. "Did you calm down?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Chloe's upstairs packing. She's devastated, Helen. Absolutely ruined. I hope you're ready to write a massive check for her therapy." I walked over and stood between him and the television. "The sculpture is broken," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "The glass abstract piece in the living room. It's shattered." Richard paused, his glass hovering near his mouth. He blinked, doing the mental math. The big ugly one. $30,000, Richard. That's the inventory value." He set the glass down slowly. The smugness vanished, replaced by the calculating, rapid-fire processing of an accountant trying to hide a deficit. Okay, don't panic. Accidents happen. It's just a thing. You have a massive 401k, Helen. We'll just liquidate a small portion, write the company a check, and tell Sterling you knocked it over while moving in. Clean, simple. I stared at him. The sheer audacity was almost majestic. "You want me to drain my retirement fund to cover your daughter destroying corporate property? You make enough money," Richard snapped, his temper flaring, standing up to tower over me. "Don't be so damn greedy, Helen. She's a kid. She made a mistake. Are you really going to ruin a 22-year-old's life over a piece of glass? You're going to pay for it, you're going to tell Sterling it was you, and we're going to move on. Or, so help me God, I will make this divorce the ugliest, most expensive nightmare of your miserable life." He was threatening me. My husband, the man I had supported, cooked for, and loved for decades, was threatening to destroy me to protect his illegal cash cow. "Okay," I whispered softly. Richard stopped, surprised by my sudden compliance. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, good. See, was that so hard? Just write the check, Helen. It's the right thing to do." "I'll handle it tomorrow," I said. I turned and walked to the guest bedroom. I locked the door. I didn't sleep a single wink. I sat at the small desk, opened my laptop, and began compiling the most meticulously documented file of my entire professional career. Thursday morning, the Sterling Enterprises executive boardroom was a place of hushed, terrifying power. It was located on the top floor, a massive expanse of polished mahogany and leather. The quarterly executive review board was in session. Mr. Sterling was at the head of the table, flanked by the chief financial officer, the head of legal, and the VP of human resources. I wasn't on the schedule. I pushed open the heavy double doors at exactly 10 a.m. The room fell dead silent. 12 powerful men and women turned to stare at me. "Helen," Mr. Sterling said, his voice a low rumble of warning. "We are in the middle of a closed session. What is the meaning of this?" I didn't apologize. I walked the length of the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I reached the head of the table. I placed a thick, bound manila folder directly in front of Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and loud. I am here to formally report a gross violation of corporate policy, destruction of company property, and a coordinated financial fraud. The head of legal sat up, adjusting his glasses. The word fraud was the ultimate trigger in a room like this. Mr. Sterling looked at the folder, then up at me. Explain. Yesterday, you ordered me to clear unauthorized personnel from Suite 401, I began, looking him dead in the eye. When I arrived to do so, I discovered the suite had been severely damaged. A $30,000 commissioned artwork is completely destroyed. The corporate account has been billed thousands in unauthorized room service. Mr. Sterling's face turned a shade of mottled purple. You are confessing to this level of negligence. I warned you, Helen. I am not finished, sir, I interrupted. It was the first time in 35 years I had ever interrupted a CEO. It felt glorious. I also discovered evidence that the suite was not being used for studying. It was being actively subleased on a peer-to-peer luxury rental network for $2,500 a night by my stepdaughter. A collective gasp echoed around the mahogany table. The CFO leaned forward, his eyes wide. Subleased, using corporate property. Yes, I said. I opened the folder, revealing the high-resolution prints of the application interface. I have provided the transaction history. 10 bookings this month alone. Good God, Helen, the HR director breathed. You're fired. You realize you're immediately terminated for this. Before you draft the termination papers, I said, my voice slicing through the rising panic in the room. I suggest you look at page 4. The routing numbers for the payout. Mr. Sterling flipped to page 4. He stared at the numbers. He looked at the CFO. The CFO pulled a tablet from his briefcase, furiously typing in the routing and account information. The silence in the room stretched until it was agonizing. This. The CFO whispered, looking up, his face pale. This is an employee payroll account. It's Richard's account. Our senior auditor. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted instantly from corporate annoyance to sheer, unadulterated legal panic. Richard, Mr. Sterling repeated softly. The CEO's mind was moving at light speed. Your husband. Our accountant. He knew about the subleasing. He didn't just know, sir, I said, standing tall. The weight of 30 years of subservience falling off my shoulders like a heavy cloak. He was receiving the funds. He was hiding the income. And last night, when I confronted him about the $30,000 damage, he explicitly ordered me to liquidate my personal 401k to pay the company back, threatening a vindictive divorce if I exposed his daughter. Mr. Sterling closed the folder. The quiet in the room was absolute. He looked at the head of legal. Lock down Richard's network access. Immediately, Mr. Sterling commanded, his voice cold and devoid of mercy. Freeze his keycard. Get security down to the audit floor. Do not let him touch a single shred of paper. We are doing a full forensic sweep of every account he has touched in the last 5 years. The legal head practically sprinted out of the room. Mr. Sterling turned back to me. His eyes were no longer angry. They were calculating, assessing. Helen, you brought this to us. You handed us the evidence of your own husband embezzling through company assets. Why? Because, Mr. Sterling, I said, lifting my chin. I am a regional director for this company. I earned my position through decades of loyalty and hard work. I will not allow a man to leverage my success to fund his fraud. And I will not be the scapegoat for his entitlement. I am prepared to face whatever disciplinary action you deem necessary for failing to secure the suite initially. Mr. Sterling steepled his fingers, staring at me for a long, quiet moment. The other executives watched with bated breath. Disciplinary action, Mr. Sterling mused. He leaned back. Helen, you uncovered an internal auditor engaged in active financial malfeasance. If he's hiding 25 grand from a penthouse, God knows what he's hiding in the quarterly ledgers. You didn't cost us $30,000 today. You likely saved us millions. He looked at the HR director. Helen's record remains spotless. The damage to the suite will be written off as a corporate loss due to internal fraud. And we will pursue civil restitution directly from Richard and his daughter. I felt my knees go weak, but I locked them, refusing to show a crack. However, Mr. Sterling continued, the penthouse is a crime scene now, and the gossip here will be toxic once security drags him out. He paused, looking at a map of the global offices on the wall behind him. The Paris division needs a senior oversight director. Someone with ironclad integrity who isn't afraid to drop the hammer on comfortable men making bad decisions. The housing allowance there is a villa in the 16th arrondissement. Does that interest you, Helen? I blinked, the tears finally rising, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated triumph. Yes, Mr. Sterling. I believe my French is quite passable. By noon, I was standing in the lobby, holding a fresh cup of coffee. The elevator doors opened. Two massive security guards stepped out, flanking Richard. He was carrying a cardboard box. His face was a mask of absolute, paralyzing shock and humiliation. The building manager, the same one he had chuckled with 2 days ago, watched with a cold smirk. Richard saw me. He stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The smug, arrogant accountant was gone, replaced by a terrified man realizing his life was entirely over. Helen, he choked out, his voice cracking. Helen, please. They're talking about extortion charges. The police are coming. You have to tell them I didn't mean it. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I looked at the man who had demanded I bleed my retirement dry to save his spoiled child. I searched my soul for a shred of pity, a drop of the empathy he claimed I lacked. It was completely bare. Efficiency of resources, Richard, I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for him to hear. I'm just protecting my assets. I turned my back on him as the security guards shoved him toward the revolving doors, out into the bitter, unforgiving cold. 3 months later, the view from my balcony in Paris is nothing short of spectacular. I can see the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance. The villa is enormous, quiet, and perfectly clean. I drink the expensive wine, and nobody ruins my peace. The divorce is going exactly as my Parisian lawyers promised. Swiftly and brutally in my favor. Richard is facing serious federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. Without his income, the suburban house went into foreclosure. I heard through the grapevine that Chloe had to drop her gap year plans. She's currently working shifts at a budget motel, ironically, not too far from the one I slept in, trying to help her father pay his mounting legal fees. The saintly father-daughter bond wears incredibly thin when the luxury dries up and the reality of minimum wage sets in. I was walking through the Marais district yesterday, wearing a coat I bought for myself, feeling the crisp European sun on my face. I thought about the broken glass, the lies, the sheer audacity of what they tried to do to me. I smiled, adjusted my silk scarf, and went to buy a fresh croissant. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You can also drop a comment below, even just one word to let me know you were here and listening.